This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, I'm with Marty and Reed Dent as we begin our journey deep into the prophecy of Isaiah by considering what we can learn from Abraham Joshua Heschel about the prophetic pathos.
We have a good little series here to kick off season session 8. And we probably want to do some setup. Like I want to do, what was there, Brent? Was there 10, 12 episodes that I have? And I think the rest of the team's going to add to that, but we got a good 10 to 15 episodes at least of Isaiah conversation, and it's hard to just dive right in. It's been a while since we did Prophets session 2. It was a long time ago. So we've learned some things.
I actually have some questions to set us up, if you don't mind.
Well, why not? We're either going to say later or we're going to answer them.
I want to know, just thinking through the mind of a Bama listener who, they listen to everything, but they begrudgingly listen to session 2. and really like haven't we gone past that? We got to Jesus. We understand. We see I get it. Jesus quoted Isaiah. He fulfilled Isaiah. And I know fulfilling is, not quite what I originally thought. I know that it's more about whatever. Like, I understand all that, but now that we've got to Jesus, why do we need to go back to Isaiah? What is the point of reading Isaiah?
I guess there is none. We should just cancel. I guess that's it. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again soon.
There you go. Reed's got a series up on Psalms up next on the Bama Podcast.
All right.
We already talked about that, too. We don't need to. I think we're done. We did the whole Bible.
I think Reed's making a great point in his wonderful reedy kind of a way. Because the Bible is this never-ending wrestling match and conversation. And I had to go study some more because I wasn't prepared to do an in-depth, and we're still not going super in-depth, but I wasn't prepared to go a layer deeper in Isaiah. It's a big book, big conversation, big prophet.
Is this going to be like a verse by verse like we did with John?
Not even a little. We've been doing that for 3 years. So we took one whole year to do John. There's 3 times as many chapters. So not even a little. We're not even gonna get close to verse by verse, but section by section. I mean, last time we did a podcast for each one of the voices that I personally liked and identified for. But let's go one layer deeper and go like 2 or 3 episodes per each one of those sections. So that's kind of what we're going to do. But yeah, it's the most quoted book by Jesus. Most quoted. Jesus quotes all 3 parts of Tanakh. Psalms being the most quoted in Ketuvim. Isaiah being the most quoted in the Nevi'im. And then Deuteronomy being the most quoted in Torah. So probably... And I did a big study, Brent, in preparation. I didn't know which prophets I wanted to dive deep in. So I just read the whole section of my library. I just read all the sources I had on prophets. 90% of them were just garbage, just pure garbage. But
how many books is that?
Wasn't nearly as much as you might think. I thought it was going to be more, and my prophets section is very weak, which probably even relates to Brent's question here. Like, why would we want to do? I mean, that's probably not the popular portion of Scripture. So yeah, I probably had 12 of my own sources. Maybe a few of those were multi-volume sources in one volume, whatever I'm trying to say, 2 or 3 books in one volume. But yeah, the only 2 prophets that I looked at Nahum, I looked at Habakkuk, I did 2 sources on Jonah, and I feel like I've exhausted in so many ways my thoughts on Jonah on so many different platforms. But the only 2 prophets I was drawn to were Isaiah and Hosea. And so I don't know if I'll do a Hosea series maybe next season. I don't know. But those are the only 2 where there felt like there was more to say at this point, which means I just need to keep studying. But that's why for me, I don't know for the typical Bema listener, but that's why it matters for me.
Well, and I guess that sort of leads into my next question. As you've read all of these terrible takes on Isaiah and other prophets, what is, and specifically about Isaiah, where do scholars and other thinkers go wrong when they're trying to tackle Isaiah? Like, what is it about this book that is the typical snare or thing that trips someone up when they're trying to understand what's going on here?
Well, I would say this is true for all the prophets and not just Isaiah. And I know that there are sources that don't do this, so I'm going to get like a million emails telling me I need to read a bunch of books that I don't have time to read. But I know that the pool that I swam in for this whole study fell into two camps. You either have a very conservative fundamentalist reading of Scripture that is very, all these prophets are predicting the future. I'm going to interpret this through very straight evangelical theology, which is completely irrelevant to the prophetic conversation in the Old Testament. Just your typical evangelical rendering and reading that I think where a lot of us are used to. Or you had the very, very liberal textual critical, let's just zoom up here and nobody's going to assume that there's really any. So I'm working on this other project, which will remain nameless at the moment. But one of the things that this scholar I'm studying, Dr. Ephraim Radner, invited his listeners to do was to take Scripture seriously. And he's saying that in an academic setting. And I feel like so much of textual criticism does not take the Scripture as something coming, a piece of theology from God, seriously. It just takes as a piece of literature and then analyzes it to death and dissects it, and I find a lot of value in that. And then it's just lifeless at the end. And so that was the two sides of the pool that I'm just banging my head against a wall all summer. So there you go.
Okay, final question, and I think this is going to be the one where you're like, we'll get to that. But what are the hooks or the frameworks that I need to understand Isaiah better than I did before? And we're not doing verse by verse. We're not going to spend 3 years in it. But like, if we do want to go one layer deeper in Isaiah than what we've done before, what are the things that I need to actually accomplish that?
We will probably talk a bunch about that. Now, Reed, I recently heard in a message that you preached, happened to be on Isaiah, you talked about, were there like 6 sections you referred to in Isaiah? Not the voices that we talked about in season 2, but I felt like you said there were almost 6 different periods, historical periods, that Isaiah dealt with. Did you actually have a source that identified that in a particular way?
Well, no, I think the thing that you're thinking of that I said, I gave a sermon trying to trace the history, the actual time and places and people surrounding the prophecies in Isaiah. And I sort of broke that history of Ahaz and Judah specifically into 6 parts, like narrative parts. That was just entirely something that I came up with.
Okay, sure.
Not what I would not say that as a framework for understanding like the whole history of Isaiah or anything like that.
Sure.
It was a pastoral move trying to help our college students find something just to resonate with, like, because you gloss when you get to the history stuff.
Yeah.
And so trying to help people see how does the particular person and nation that Isaiah is speaking to, how does that have anything to do with us? That was what I was talking about.
Sure. Yep. I found it intriguing. I found it helpful too. I think that Isaiah is this huge book, and I still, with all the study I've done, I still have these knee-jerk reactions, and whenever I open my Bible, there's all this stuff that just automatically happens because of my upbringing, and I open Isaiah, and even though I'm a historical context, nerd, I still tend to lose. I enjoy any framework like that allows me to go, okay, this is where this prophet's landing. This is where I can relate to. It's like it serves as doorways for me to walk into it. And relating to Brent's question, like, I know what that door is. I can walk through that door because that relates to, whatever experience I have, a similar experience, similar season in my own life. So it was a pastoral move, but a good one.
I did find, we're going to talk about Heschel, but I found Heschel's, his just kind of report on the history going on around Isaiah extremely helpful.
Sure. Right. Yeah. And that might be a good segue to, you got anything else, Brent, or should we Should we dive in?
Well, I was just going to ask if we should link Reed's sermon.
We probably should. The problem is which one. He's already done a couple of that. They're doing a whole series right now at CCF, and I've really enjoyed what everybody's bringing in the prod. They're not just doing Isaiah. They're focusing on Isaiah, but they're doing a bunch of others too.
Marty's going to do one of those.
I am. I'm going to talk on Micah, if I remember correctly.
Accurate.
Not one of your two prophets that you...
And I gave him the choice. I said, what do you want to talk about? And he said Micah.
Yep.
All right. There you go.
Yep. I felt like that's what the Holy Spirit was prodding me with. So who would be I to kick against the goads?
Well, we'll figure out the right sermon to link, and we'll link
Okay.
whatever we get.
Okay. I think this one was just called History, right? The one we were just immediately talking about, right?
That's how it shows up on our podcast feed. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not the title. Reed's proud about his titles, and History would not cut it.
Thank you. If I tried to put my titles on the podcast episodes, it wouldn't fit.
Yeah, that's correct.
What is the full title?
Let me tell you, Brent. Let me pull it up really quick.
There's always multiple titles. This is a Reedism.
It's a thing. Yeah, it's kind of what I'm known for around CCF, is that I always give my sermons multiple titles, anywhere from, I mean, sometimes there's just one, but usually anywhere from 3 to 7 titles. Because why should you have to pick just one?
I mean, sure.
Here is the title of the sermon Marty is talking about. The first title is this: You were afraid. You made the moment everything. You gave away your awe. You forgot your calling. You doubled down. And the ungods shall utterly vanish. That was title 1. Title 2, Prophecy Needs Place. Title 3, Dear Judah, Dear Truman. That was it. That was the titles.
The David Crowder album, A Collision or 3 + 4 = 7. Dual title in the title.
Yeah.
And one of the tracks, the 11-second track titled Repeat Return, or When the Seventh Angel Sounded His Trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven which said, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever, etc. Which probably took more than 11 seconds to say.
Yeah.
I think you two should hang out, probably.
Maybe. Or W.H. Auden wrote a long-form poem called The Age of Anxiety, and he has a section in there where they're naming a club and it gets a bunch of ors. Or there's another book called Lost in the Cosmos by Walker Percy that actually has like 8 titles on the inside of the title page, and it's one of the best books ever written. So there's smart people, we do smart things.
Well, with that, speaking of smart people, the conversation for me, I've kind of drafted this episode, and Reed's kind of drafted the next episode's conversation. I drafted mine around Abraham Joshua Heschel's, I mean, it's a tome, but The Prophets. And it really is I feel like it's 2 books. It definitely has 2 parts, separated and distinguished in 2 parts. But it is, let's see here, how many, we have about just shy of 650 pages, so 630 something. It is a work. But just full of goodness. And I've kind of used that to serve as an outline for my intro and setup to prophets as we get kind of focused on Isaiah. But really, you can't just talk about Isaiah without talking about prophets in general. So we're going to do that this episode and next episode, kind of with our eyes pointed towards Isaiah, and let that kind of set us up in our conversation. But it's a really cool work. The first part of Heschel's book basically sets up just the idea of like, what is the manner of a prophet, right before he spends the rest of part 1 basically jumping through not every single prophet, but many of the prophets. He's gonna walk through. I'm trying to get to my table of contents here. Isaiah, he's going to split it up into 1st Isaiah and 2nd Isaiah. That's a very, very common move academically, by the way. Lots of different arguments about how many authors, how many redactors, how many voices. You heard me in session 2 talk about 4 voices of Isaiah. I would say the dominant move I ran into all summer was pretty much an indisputed claim that you have 1 and 2, at the very least 1 and 2, Isaiah 1 through 39, and then 40 through 66. But he deals with that. He talks about Amos. He talks about Hosea. He talks about Micah and Jeremiah and Habakkuk. But he has this opening chapter, and I just thought all the little subtitles within the chapter subsections were just so fun to. He's talking about what is a prophet. He has things like luminous and explosive. Good choice of words there. That feels very Reed Dent-esque. Luminous and explosive.
Those are great words.
The highest good, 1 octave too high. A prophet being an iconoclast. Austerity and compassion, sweeping allegations. I love this phrase. I think I have this. I'm probably going to use this phrase so much people are going to get tired of it. But this subtitle here, few are guilty, all are responsible. I loved that phrase. Few are guilty, all are none are guilty. There are some folks that the prophets will directly point a prophetic word at. Usually people in power, people of influence. There are some that are guilty, and those things are made clear. But the true invitation of the prophet is for us to hear that all are responsible. None of us get to read the prophet and say, oh yeah, those guys. It's about them. The prophet is inviting all of us on some level to be, and I just loved that phrase. Does that hit you in any particular way, Reed?
Well, what I was thinking as you were saying that is that yes, I love that phrase. And that the prophet considers himself to also be a part of that same group. That the prophet, there's a sense of solidarity, right? Which we can talk about a little bit if you want to. I mean, I think we have a picture of. I have a picture of prophet that's like the sort of televangelist or person out on the quad, like yelling at people, and it's a very accusatory, like you're so bad.
Yep.
And it's not that the prophets aren't making accusations, but Heschel talks about the kind of essentialness of compassion. That when they get angry and riled up, it's not because they're like on a moral high horse or something that they think they are better. It comes from this place of compassion. I am in this thing with you. I am speaking to you as one of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the nature of this conversation, not the you, but the we, this solidarity idea, seems to go wider than just between prophet and audience. Like one of the things that we're going to talk hopefully a lot about before we're done with this episode today is what, like, Heschel's infatuated with this idea of pathos. And so there is a we element. There is a solidarity between the prophet and God as well. It almost feels priestly, like the prophet stands in the middle of this gap between God and the people, but solidarity seems to kind of envelop and just cloak all of it. And so that's actually super. But you enjoy, I know.
Well, so I was actually reading the Cultural Background Study Bible Introduction to Isaiah, and they were talking about how other nations around Israel who had prophets, it wasn't like that. Like the idea of addressing the whole nation was an idea unique to Israel and the people of God, whereas the other prophets in other nations were typically just addressing the king.
Yeah, I did encounter that in some of the sources, and I think Heschel deals with that, especially in part 2 of his work as well, where he really is going to start to home in on what are all the conceptions of a prophet, and what, we have all these, a prophet is this, a prophet, and he's going to dismantle almost all those categories that we easily slip a prophet into and say, but they were different than that. Like we might be used to that over here, but they weren't that. They were more than that, or they were something else. And that's part of what I loved about part 2 of his book. But I know you're familiar with this work, Reed. You've looked into Heschel quite a bit. Did you like that opening chapter of The Manner of a Prophet?
Yeah, I mean, I first encountered this book, I don't know, a decade or more ago. I've returned to it several times. I'm actually using it again right now in our study on the prophets of CCF. This first chapter, What Manner of Man is the Prophet, I think is one of just the best chapters of scholarship of any kind on anything, because Heschel isn't like, he doesn't suck the life out of it. Like, he's writing about things in detail and thoroughly, but you read, how it is reading scholarship, and like Heschel has a fire, like there is a real spirit in this thing.
Yes.
It feels, as he writes about prophets, it feels almost prophetic to me.
Right.
It's this chapter is like, if I had a Hall of Fame of chapters of books that I've read, this first chapter would definitely be in that Hall of Fame.
I like that. And it actually, so then you get to chapter 4 and it jumps into Isaiah. And there is this section where Heschel does like just some pretty basic, what I would call historical context work. And it's so funny that you said what you just said, because it feels odd that he spends just a passing moment doing this. It wasn't like it was out of character for Heschel, but you're so used to all of this thunderous goodness in the midst of his writing that it felt a little interesting to read. Almost, I don't know if it's abstract, but just, historical context. But Heschel talked about how there wasn't this wealth gap, like some of the ideas that we might bring with us. What does L call that? Presentivism? What'd you call that, Brent Billings?
Presentism?
Yeah. And we bring that with us, and we kind of assume that Isaiah is talking about the same kind of things we experience and know today. And Heschel makes a point of pointing out this was a people that was a whole people group, a whole nation that had made use of commercial enterprise. Unlike their neighbors to the north in the kingdom of Israel and Samaria, which had created a wealth gap that might resemble a lot of the things that we're more used to today, Judah was its own unique situation. Talked about how this was in a lot of ways, quote, the most critical moment in Judah's history to date. So at this point in history, they found themselves kind of at the historical crux, the culmination of where their history had brought them. The future of Judah hung in the balance. Samaria was doomed, Heschel said. It talks about Isaiah confronting Ahaz, and I noticed you pulled this exact same quote out in your own sermon too, Reed. Isaiah asked Ahaz to believe that it was neither Pekah nor Rezin nor even the mighty Tiglath-Pileser who governed history. The world was in the hands of God. So you have all these movers and shakers, powerful kingdoms, rulers that everybody assumes, well, those are the people that are guiding the hands of fate. Those are the people writing history right now. And Isaiah begs Ahaz, God through Isaiah begs Ahaz to reconsider that assumption. What seemed to be a terror to Ahaz was a trifle to Isaiah, was another quote that I really liked.
Which is a shocking thing, because the terror to Ahaz is also something I think we would call a terror. I mean, the security of the nation is at risk.
100%.
Because, he's got Pekah and Rezin to the north, who are like threatening they're forming an alliance. They're going to come after Judah. And then you've got Assyria just kind of there lurking, threatening, like the superpower that's kind of threatening everything. And it's like, oh gosh, are we going to survive as a people? Like, what are we supposed to do here? And Isaiah is like, this is not the most important thing.
Right.
This is not, like, yes, on the one hand, I mean, your national destiny is important, but there are other things that Isaiah then goes on about so much more than whatever war is brewing.
Yeah, and you just said we as a people, and again, reinforcing what we just said earlier, this isn't just about, few are guilty, but all are responsible. Mm-hmm. That same idea coming back to my next note and my notes in front of me say, in their moment of despair. So beyond Ahaz, beyond just the power and the king and the person that you feel like the prophecy is, well, that's about them. In the midst of that, we still have the despair, the darkness, the distress of an actual people, an actual nation with real life implications. And the message here is that God has not forgotten you, even though your circumstances feel like he has. God sees this moment. And then in their moments of elation, because there are these moments of triumph all throughout, the first 39 chapters of Isaiah. These promises of restoration, experiences of, I think of Hezekiah's story much later, but these like, okay, we hit a turning point, but in their moments of elation, warning that they don't see what's really happening. So always this prophetic, and I think we're going to talk about this some in the next episode with you, Reed. There's always this call, this prophetic call to realize that no matter what it looks like in front of us, chances are good we at the very least don't see the whole picture. And at the most, we see something totally different than the truth that's actually there. Whether it's goodness and triumph or distress and defeat, we are not seeing everything that might be in front of us.
Yeah, it's at CCF, so we had back-to-back sermons on Amos and then on Isaiah. And Amos is coming from a different time when there is a lot of prosperity and things are like going really well. And we were talking about this at our sermon discussion today. Emily, the girl who preached that sermon, she said, it's interesting how in my sermon, I was talking about this idea of like what a fear of scarcity will cause you to do. It'll cause you to compromise on your values or like forget your calling, right? Because you got to hoard, and then she's like, but in Amos, the word is abundance. But either way, whether it's scarcity or whether it's abundance, there is the possibility that you are going to set God aside. Like in your abundance, you will forget God. Forget that God gave you the ability to accumulate that abundance. And in your scarcity, you will forget God because you're afraid. And so you'll reach for anything that's close by. Here, Assyria, please help us. In order to not be, wiped out.
Correct.
So yeah, the prophet, I think, always has something to challenge.
Yeah, so Heschel closes out this first Isaiah, the last section of this first Isaiah chapter with this, the prophetic call is this idea that if you're not going to trust the story, to use Bema language, if you're not going to trust the story, you will not remain. Your current lack of trust is not sustainable. And it's this plea from God where Heschel pulls us into this idea of pathos. He is experiencing, and we'll talk a little bit more about what pathos means for Heschel. But the prophet is, again, the idea of solidarity. The prophet is experiencing God's sorrow. He's experiencing, when I first read this, I hated this idea theologically. But I mean, it's Heschel, so who am I going to argue with? But sympathy from the prophet toward God. Like, because the prophet is sharing in solidarity of God's experience in sorrow and lament, the prophet has this sense of sympathy toward God. And this idea that God longs to be with his people. This is not God separate from the heavens, but a God that wants to, I think, Reed, at one point you used the idea of, we often picture God and the prophets playing whack-a-mole and that concept. Yeah,
just this, when we think about how God regards the sin of the people, we sometimes have this picture of I call it a holiness whack-a-mole, where God is like poised over the board with a giant divine hammer, and that anytime sin pops up, he's just going to be like, wham! And he's going to crush it back down. Wham, 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 wham. And it assumes a kind of very like black and white binary of like sin and God's response to sin. It's almost mechanical and automated, like, oh, there is sin, whack. But the way that the prophets portray God is oftentimes more like a husband who has been spurned by his wife, by his lover. Or one that I resonate with is just a father like contending with children who will not listen, where there's like this tension between I love you so much and also you are driving me crazy and I don't know how much more I can take.
Right.
And just to frame God in those very human relationships does a lot to show this isn't just like God as this gas of righteousness and holiness that then must choke out anytime there is like a sin. but God is relating to you like someone in your family. And if you can be honest enough to see, like, you're not doing too well, then you might understand God's not just angry. And Heschel talks about this. It's also that God is grieved.
Yes.
That God is sad, even disappointed. Like, there are parts in the prophets where God says, I called you out and I thought it was going to go like this. Like, I thought you would listen to me and you didn't listen to me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that sets up, like, a few chapters later, Heschel will circle back around to the second part of Isaiah. And now the context has changed historically, and that context matters. So prior to that, they were listening to the warning. Assyria's on their doorstep. Then it's going to be but now they've been in Babylon. Now they've experienced the very real suffering. And yet Heschel will say, we're still in the middle of the pathos. And yet the pathos has now changed because of the context.
Did you say what the chapter breaks are that he uses for these first and second parts?
Yeah, 1 through 39 and then 40 through 66, okay. That's the standard break that usually everybody will use because that's what at least everybody recognizes. Everything else is hotly debated. So, but in this second section, now in the middle of this prophetic pathos, this experience of solidarity with God, now the prophet is bewildered at God's lack of action. So now the prophet looks around at the suffering and, okay, now your justice, now your divine discipline has been experienced. But now we need to see your rescue. So where is it? And God reminds the prophet of the prophet's place. One of Heschel's subtitles in the middle of that chapter, who taught him the path of justice, referring to God? Who taught God the path of justice? And so
sounds like Job.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the exact same thought when I was reading that. And so Heschel will go through the section of the suffering servant. Obviously, Heschel's not a believer, believing a Jew who follows Jesus. So Heschel does not see Jesus in the suffering servant passage. I think there's even some comments here and there because he works in a world of Jewish and Christian scholarship. But you get to see Heschel's take on the prophet and the prophet's suffering and the prophet's suffering with the people. Like the hard way it is to pull apart, is this Isaiah or is this the people of God? And the answer is really both. You even see the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8, by the way, wrestling with this question. Is the prophet speaking about himself or somebody else? I know that Isaiah is experiencing suffering. It feels like this is also about everybody else's suffering. And the answer to that question is obviously yes. And then Heschel will close out the rest of part 1, outside of the other prophets, with these kind of closing ideas and movements about history, chastisement, and justice. History in a conversation about Dr. Radner, I referenced him earlier, in the same lecture that I'm thinking about, he also said that history is informed and defined by, as a theologian, history is defined by the prophets. The prophets are the one that get to frame what history is and what's happening in history through that prophetic pathos. And so he has a chapter on that idea. He has a chapter on chastisement. That's what we're familiar with the prophets, this depressing chastisement. And yet Heschel breaks down that chastisement into some really helpful categories for me, talking about the futility that we're giving ourselves to, talking about the failure of freedom. Like God gave us this freedom, kind of what Reed was referencing a moment ago. Like I gave you this freedom. I built a vineyard, thinking of Isaiah 5. I planted it with the choicest vine. I cleared it of stones. I built the wall. I thought it would bear good fruit. I gave you the freedom, but that freedom failed because of how you chose to engage it. There's a failure of freedom. So then God says, so I'm going to take your freedom away. There's a suspension of freedom. I will suspend that freedom. And then there's always this, what did we talk about in session 2, Brent? With every single prophet, there was always a sprinkling of, that was a long time ago, but I bet you remember.
Sprinkling of hope.
Sprinkling of hope. And I love how Heschel worded it. He said this, quote, no word is God's last word. So God gives these prophetic words. He utters these prophecies of destruction and discipline and wrath, but no word is God's last word. God will have a word that comes after that. So there's a failure of freedom, there's a suspension of freedom, but then because of this process, there's also a future. And then he talks about justice, and talks about mishpat and tzedakah, two words that we've talked about a lot on the podcast before, justice and righteousness. And then one of the things that was clear to me in this chapter was a conversation about, I mean, he didn't say this in so many words. He's at a different point in modern history when he was alive and writing. But he very much made a clear, like there was a solidarity of what are two distinct worldviews in our culture, which is personal moral responsibility and then social, I hate to use the word social justice because it's such a buzzword that sets people off, but social togetherness and restoration, the social element and the personal moral element. What we separate into a conservative socio-political paradigm and a progressive liberal socio-political paradigm. And he says the prophets bring both of these things together, clearly together, neither one of them missing, nor are they separate compartmentalized conversations. And it goes back to that same idea of few are guilty, but all are responsible. So we have this personal and social, a vertical and horizontal nature to this thing that the prophets are calling us to. Does that make you think of anything or have any thoughts to add to that?
I mean, it just makes me wonder why we separate them.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, just thinking about why we separate them.
I think it's fun to keep that in mind as we go through Isaiah, because it's such a temptation to idolatry in our culture, or whatever our socio-political ideologies are that we cling to. And yet to pay attention as we look through Isaiah, this marriage of the personal moral responsible and the social responsibility, and both of those things working hand in hand, and how you don't get one. Yeah, not only why we separate the two, but how that would even work when you step back and think about it. How could you ever really pursue social responsibility without personal moral responsibility? And how could you say there's any personal moral responsibility if it's not producing some level of social responsibility?
It also makes me think of, and I think you did do this. Maybe this was kind of building to the conclusion of the prophets back in session 2, but another kind of false dichotomy that we create is, in prophetic language, it would be the division between idolatry and injustice.
Right.
And how some people say, oh, the biggest problem in our world is idolatry, that we are giving ourselves over to the norms of the culture,
Yep.
and we're not living faithfully to God. And that other people would say, no, the biggest problem is injustice, that there are all these places where there is not fairness or equity, where there is oppression, and we're not doing anything about that. And like the liberal side tends to say, yeah, we can just take care of that. We don't need God in the picture. And the conservative side tends to say, oh, all that we need to do is just like focus on God and everything will just work out, or it won't matter in the end anyway. And the prophets hold them together, not even just side by side, but in like a mutually reinforcing kind of relationship. There is like a cause and effect cycle between them, where if you're worshiping the wrong thing, then yes, you will be, and we'll talk about this some more in the next episode with Brueggemann's prophetic imagination. So I think I might leave this actually on the table for now, give a great big teaser, and then just leave it.
I like that.
But that's a substantial part of what he's talking about. He's noticing this dichotomy that's not really real.
Yeah, and I as you were saying that, I thought back to session 2 years ago, and it has been years ago, Brent, where we like purposely drew some lines in the sand to almost tongue-in-cheek pull us into this, like, is it story A or story B? But it didn't take very long. You actually couldn't maintain that for very long, because you'd get to these other prophets where they're so interwoven together. It's no longer an either or. It was like helpful for us to pull them apart so we could look at them. But eventually it's like, oh, actually idolatry is all wrapped up in injustice, and injustice is coming from idolatry, and you can't pull these two things apart.
I actually remember this because back then I was just your friend and a listener. I was not on the show. And I remember texting you about this like on the side and saying, Marty, I'm pretty sure it's both. I'm pretty sure it's both. And you're like, yeah, we're going to get to it. Just wait. And then finally you were like, hey, guess what, everybody? It's both.
We were so clever back then.
Oh,
so clever.
You got me hook, line, and sinker because I had a spot in my notes for every prophet where I was going to put which one it was. And then I'm like,
I didn't even let Brent in on the secret.
Oh, I can picture your notebook now. That's beautiful, Brent. That is beautiful.
All right, so we'll close this thing out. Heschel has a second part to this tome, like this big old book, and it's the smallest part of notes on my document in front of me, but it was my favorite part of the study because it's where he took it was almost the frustrating part of the study, which is why it was so good. Because I thought I would understand prophets, and then I would turn the page and be like, only that doesn't work, so it's not that. And I'd be like, okay, I think it's this. And the next chapter would be like, nope, it's not that either. Okay, it's probably this. And it's like he was anticipating where my brain was going, and he just kept dismantling all the things that I thought. But you get to the second part of the book.
This book is 700 pages, by the way. How far
it is
into it are you when you get to the second part?
Second part would be... Oh, let's see here. Let me get to my table of contents.
In my book, page 285 is where volume 2 starts. And it goes from 285 to 627.
So 400 pages of dismantling your ideas.
And I think, actually, just as a point of fact, I think this was originally published as 2 separate volumes, and then now is just published as a single work.
Yeah, that's the impression that I got. He starts by really digging into this, like he's been mentioning pathos. He's said enough about it that it's been helpful, but he really wants to dive into it. So he talks about pathos from a theological perspective, the theology of pathos. He then talks about it philosophically, which I always never like to admit I like philosophy, but that's when Heschel's like, I feel like he's just banging on all cylinders when he's doing his philosophical thing. So he talks about the philosophy of pathos. He talks about what he calls anthropopathy of pathos.
I looked it up and it was not in my dictionary. So
there you go. I believe he explains what he means when he says that, and it's connected to the same idea of pathos as it's connected to anthropology, and he's putting these ideas together.
Oh, is this related to? I'm looking it up on the internet because that has all definitions, Brent. Anthropopathy is ascribing human passions or feelings to beings or beings that are not human. So it's like an anthropomorphism. Instead of giving a being, though, like human physical characteristics, you're attributing emotional characteristics to a deity.
Right. That idea of pathos going both directions.
Right. So like when we're talking about God as a disappointed father or a spurned lover and having those feelings, that's what we're talking about.
Right. Which bridges into the next section, which is on wrath, which is exactly what Reed's talking about. And you get these, if there are helpful handles when we're thinking about wrath, it's that ability for us to relate on those levels. And so Heschel talks about that. He talks about the meaning of wrath and the mystery of wrath.
Dude, this chapter, by the way, is also phenomenal.
Yes.
I love this chapter. Reminds me of you were making this point in the earlier sessions about the difference between disciplining and punishing, and that the idea behind wrath is that it is not destructive.
Yes.
It is not merely like punitive,
right?
But that it is meant to be corrective.
Correct. Right.
And that, of course, like, I mean, I get that some of us might be uncomfortable with the idea of a God who gets angry. And I want to, by the way, I like to draw a distinction for people and say, like, there is a difference between God being an angry God and God being a God who gets angry.
Oh, yes.
Just like there is a difference between, like, if you grew up in a household with an angry parent, like, you know what I'm talking about. Like, there's a difference between that and a parent who gets angry. And of course, there are many occasions in which parents should get angry, that if you're not getting angry, like, you're not paying attention, because we know how kids can be.
Yep.
And so I get that the idea of a God being wrathful or angry or acting out of that, and Heschel talks about this a lot, that it is like, it is not core to the nature of God's being, but it is something that is occasioned and that it motivates God's action towards setting things right. But that, if we have a God who does not get angry at the situation in the world, then...
Right.
Well, I mean, frankly, that's not a God that I would want.
That's not the option that we want to lean towards either. And we immediately kind of bump into realizing that.
But of course, he will not remain angry forever is like the refrain, right? He's not going to hold that anger forever. It's the love and mercy that endure forever.
Right.
Anyway, Heschel does an incredible job of laying all this out.
And this is why I wanted to get into this on this episode, is these are the questions that immediately come up when we start wrestling with the prophets. Like, part of it is like, man, why are you just reviewing Heschel's book? A, because I want to introduce you to a great resource. And there's a lot of you that won't take the time to read it. So why not be able to glean something from it for those that won't? Mm-hmm. But B, these are the core issues that Heschel's getting at. These are the things that come to mind when we think about prophecy. It's why it's hard to listen to prophecy, because we have to wrestle with the wrath of God and its proper place in those things. The next few chapters, there's going to be a chapters on the things that prophecy isn't. It's not ecstasy. It's not just poetic inspiration, meaning like not divine inspiration, but just like it's not just art coming to life. Mm-hmm. It's not psychosis. And again, these are the things that come up when you read the prophets. What's going on here? Is God is there an audible voice? Is the prophet just when we study the prophets, these are the things that come up for us, that we wrestle with, that we think about, that kind of get stuck in our head and keep us from being able to truly lean into the prophet in the ways that we need to. And then there are some closing chapters that Heschel gives. He gives an explanation of inspiration as far as he understands it and sees it. Not that necessarily all of us would agree on every point, but an explanation of what inspiration is.
Do you remember enough at this point to just give a brief, here's how he sees it?
Not that I would be confident that I had represented it correctly. So
okay.
I was hoping you weren't going to ask, but there you go.
Take that part out, Brent.
There's always a little bit of hope, right?
Always a little bit of hope. He has a chapter on what he calls event and experience, that they're like, again, there's a context to prophecy. It's not just abstract in the heavens talking. There's a time and a place, event and experience. Has a chapter on prophet, priest, and king, which I thought was very good. That idea gets tossed around a lot. I've done a few teachings on similar concepts. But the big takeaway for me, and the reason I wanted to bring all this up, was the idea that I found so helpful from Heschel, was that idea of pathos. It helped me frame what a prophet is. A prophet is somebody who is experiencing the reality of what God has experienced. There is that solidarity between the prophet and the people, and the prophet and God, and this triangulation of this moment in history where the prophet is truly experiencing the grief, the lament, the anger, the frustration, seeing the injustice. And it's truly this experience that the prophet shares. It's not something they learn. It's not something they see from a distance. It's something that they experience on their insides. And that's where prophecy comes from. And so, and that's going to be connection to the same idea of inspiration that you were asking about earlier, but I'm not clear enough.
Yeah.
And my memory is somewhat shaky. So, but anyway, those are the things that were so important for me when it came to that idea of pathos. Helped me reframe the relationship between a prophet and prophecy before I got into Isaiah.
For sure. I think it's probably helpful just for people who aren't familiar with the word pathos. It has to do with evoking, like, at an emotional level, or appealing to an emotional level, or an emotional experience.
Right.
As opposed to something that is like overly rational. It's not that pathos is irrational.
Correct.
It's just other than rational.
Right.
And so when we read the prophets, and I completely agree with you. Well, actually, one of the one-liners that Heschel has in that opening chapter, he says, the prophet is a man who feels fiercely.
Yes. Yes.
And that is where the message is coming from. And for folks like me, this presents a challenge because, and I know, Marty, you're way more comfortable with emotions than obviously
please. Oh, please.
Well, both of us, right? Like
Yes.
we more live naturally in the analytical, the logical, the rational, and that's fine. There is a place for that, absolutely. However, there are some of us who hold the faith or ideas about our faith in a way that is like, there is like a tyranny of the rational, and that anything that is emotional or an appeal like from pathos is suspicious, or at the very least, it's kind of weak and flimsy. And until it has like the rigor and the buttressing, the fortitude of all of our like logical arguments, then we kind of like shouldn't trust it or listen to it so much. But the prophet says, I don't care about like your logic. I don't care if I'm not asking you to create a systematic theology from my images of God as husband or father. This is not my point.
Yeah,
I am
right.
trying to get you to understand at a deep emotional level what God actually feels about this, because sometimes what we need is emotion to actually get us to do something, right? Like, you know, you can have lots of logical thoughts that'll get you thinking nice things or confusing or perplexing things, and you can sit in your chair and you can stare at the wall and you can think, and you can get out your notebook and you can make your notes. But to actually get somebody up off their butt and out doing something, I mean, think about Martin Luther King Jr. and what has been passed down to us and what really resonates like across the decades since his time. I would call him a prophet, by the way. And if that's controversial, I'm sorry, but I see it that way. And like his speeches, right? His speeches moved people to action for justice. It moved them to compassion. And I mean, if you read them, like there are certainly speeches where he's going through details of like particular spats with unions or like trade workers or whatever. But like the stuff that got the nation turning and moving was that stuff, like classic, the I Have a Dream speech, or the mountaintop speech. And you listen to that and you're like, okay, I don't need to logically, nothing about this has to be proven. Like the pathos in it is what gives it its authority.
Yeah. And to just sit in that same example, and yet there are very practical. I think the other thing we do with prophets is we take the snippets, the I have a dream paragraph, mm-hmm. and we divorce those from so you're right. He wasn't just downloading data, but nor was he merely reciting poetry, because that I have a dream speech has minutes of very fiery social critique mm-hmm. of things that were very practical and justice oriented towards, whatever. And so we can't separate those either. We either love to focus on the poetry of it, or we try mm-hmm. to make it rational and logical. And it's neither of those two things. It's like it's this wholly other mm-hmm. prophetic pathos. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great spot to set us up for next week's conversation, because we got to talk about the prophetic imagination next. So we got the prophetic pathos, but then we got to talk about the prophetic imagination. And so that's next, Brent Billings.
Okay. Well, listeners can go to BamOnASelftrip.com to find the show notes. We have quite a few things in there. You can find a group to get into. You can find upcoming events. Our contact page will give you the best and most up-to-date way to get in touch with us. So thanks for joining us on the Bama Podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.
I would work something about the prophetic pathos into that.
Isn't it pay? I think it's pathos, just if we're going to...
Well, I've also heard pathos.
Let's see.
Pathos. Pathos is what the dictionary pronunciation has.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Pathos.
Well, let's clear that up now so I don't have to hear from them for the rest of the time.
Pathos.
Pathos. Plosives.
Pathos. Yep, that'll be how it goes.
Anyway, Brent, I was trying to talk about football, and you interrupted me with Bama stuff.
About the prophetic pathos. I'm going to start the episode
Right now?
with the term pathos. I'm going to get you guys rolling on it.
Okay.
I'm going to set the speed. This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today I'm with Marty and Reed Dent as we begin our journey deep into the prophecy of Isaiah by considering what we can learn from Abraham Joshua Heschel about the prophetic pathos.
Pathos.
Dang it. I was so close. Okay. Should I just redo the whole intro?
Yeah.
You sure should.
Pathos.
There's your blooper reel.
Both
Forget-
syllables.
I'm never going to say it correctly now.
Both syllables are different than I thought.
You thought it was pathos.
I thought no, I guess I thought pathos.
So you
Pathos?
had
I
one
don't
of
know.
them right.
I don't know what I thought.
You're really
I
ruining
don't know
our
anything
chances for a football blooper reel right now. Because this is going to be it.
Is this going to be it? I don't know. Okay. Pathos. Ugh.
I agree. I don't like that pronunciation, but that's what it says. And we are good prescriptivists.
There's not even an alternative. It's the only listed pronunciation.
Whatever the prescriptivist authorities that be say is what we're going to do.